but the Senate dug in, tried to pull them all out of the bill as an amendment. That amendment failed. What did they attempt to amend in the Affordability Act within the Elections Act? Solely this, that any previous mention of the protection of private information of Canadians held by federal political parties would no longer exist. So Bill C-4, when I first read it at first reading in June, I was taken aback at finding sections about the Elections Act in a bill on affordability, and even more so when I read, and it struck me as overkill at the time, that under Part 4 of Bill C-4, any amendments that had referenced protecting private information of Canadians were, quote, deemed never to have entered into force and are repealed. That seemed like overkill anyway. Then on top of that, the literal wording was that this bill will enter into force May 31st, 2000. I'm letting that sink in for a minute. So I took it around to other MPs in the room at the time and pointed out that this bill, when it enters into force in the future, will enter into force 26 years ago. And a number of Liberal MPs said to me, my goodness, that must be a typo. And I said, I don't think so. I think that's a time machine. So it went through the House very quickly. There was an attempt to get it through by unanimous consent on December 11th. I refused unanimous consent. So what they did was they put it through at every stage, Bill C-4 and Bill C-12, and then said, these are now carried. We adjourn a day early for Christmas, noting the opposition of the member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Because there wasn't a recorded vote, the bills were scooped up and put through to get it away a day earlier than planned before Christmas. I only mention this now because it does mark the first time since Mark Carney has become Prime Minister when the Senate pushed back. There have been Senate concerns about other bills, Senate concerns about C-5, Senate was concerned about C-12. This is the first actual attempt by the Canadian Senate to amend a bill since Mark Carney became Prime Minister. The amendments they put forward were extremely reasonable. They pulled back from an attempt to actually say, let's not make this an omnibus bill, let's just take all the Elections Canada stuff out of it. They stopped short of that, and instead the Senate suggested that with their amendments, the government would come up with a plan to protect Canadian private information held by political parties within 3 years. Today, the government's response was, we plan to amend the Elections Act. We plan to deal with personal private information of Canadians, and we'll be doing it within this session of Parliament, which then I think really does, for me, make it quite lacking in credibility that they couldn't accept an amendment that says we'll deal with it within 3 years. If they're planning to deal with it within this Parliament anyway, why not accept the Senate amendments? So I have a high degree of skepticism around this. I think it was, and as I said in the House earlier today, I was the only member of Parliament to speak on Bill C-4 today. No one responded to the Senate amendments at all. And no other member of Parliament asked me a single question when I told them that they should all be ashamed. The Liberals, the Conservatives, and the Bloc that were prepared to see this bill passed but unanimously, and were prepared not to allow the Senate amendments to be carried today, reasonable amendments. So that said, we are now a full year into the Mark Carney as the Right Honourable Mark Carney as our Prime Minister, and certainly in the last 2 weeks things have even gotten worse on the climate front than they were a month ago, marking one event being March 5th, that of course, given the events of Trump's attack on and Israel's attack on Iran, some of these domestic events didn't get as much attention as they might otherwise have gotten. But on March 5th, Carney's administration put $1 billion into supporting a Norwegian oil company in its bid to drill deep water offshore ocean drilling at Bay du Nord. So the Canadian taxpayers are subsidizing that with an additional $1 billion. As well, a week ago tomorrow, so Friday of last week, we had yet another agreement with Daniel Smith, the province of Alberta, and the federal government, this time saying that wherever the province of Alberta has a particularly important project for them in the category of major projects, it could take over the federal regulations, and the province of Alberta would do reviews and issue permits on behalf of the federal government. En même temps, on dit que pour les consultations avec les peuples autochtones, aussi, c'est pas un problème, c'est pour Mme Smith de faire les consultations avec les peuples autochtones, avec les projets importants pour Alberta. So I find it, again, very distressing that in side deals with the province of Alberta, the federal government is backing away from its obligations for environmental protection and its constitutionally required obligations to engage and consult with Indigenous peoples. These are just the recent events after a full year of watching the Carney administration back away from, and in some cases run away from, commitments to protect the environment and to act on climate change, all the while now promoting not just one new pipeline across northern British Columbia and more pipelines for liquefied natural gas, but astonishingly, from a prime minister who claimed to have elbows up and wanting to diversify trade when dealing with the U.S., now promoting and trying to revive the Keystone pipeline, which is entirely about getting Canadian and Alberta oil to the United States. So I'll pause there and just say that it's a full year that Mark Carney has been Prime Minister. I'm still hoping against hope that some part of him realizes that he must be at the beginning of a learning curve. He hasn't been a member of Parliament before. Parliamentary procedures are new to him. He isn't going to ever learn them because he's so good at bulldozing over them. But one never knows. There's always the chance that something will make a brilliant man realize, I know, and he may, as I said, I'm speaking in his voice, I suppose, I may know everything there is to know about central banking, but I don't know a thing about Parliament. Maybe there's something I should be learning. I still hope he'll have that kind of epiphany that being the smartest guy in the room, in almost any room he's ever been in, doesn't mean that there's nothing to learn about respecting Parliament and properly studying legislation before bulldozing it through. I can't begin to imagine how much worse it will be if he ever gets that last floor crosser or finally gets to a majority government, because a minority Parliament with Mark Carney as Prime Minister has been extremely top-down and bulldozing towards whatever the goal of the moment is. I haven't seen anything stand in his way for more than a nanosecond, including today, the Canadian Senate.
So the fundraising data, and I guess some of the early buzz, indicates that it's quite likely that Avi Lewis will become the next leader of the NDP at the end of the month. Mr. Lewis, of course, was a co-author of the LEAP Manifesto and is putting forward an ambitious Green New Deal to rebuild the Canadian economy. Do you think Mr. Lewis's momentum is a positive sign for your brand of green politics? And could you see yourself working closely or even pursuing some sort of coalition or cooperation with an Avi Lewis-led NDP?
If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I'm deeply flattered by Avi's platform, which is entirely the Green Party election platform. So, and no one really remembers, including Avi, that when he came out with the LEAP Manifesto, within 24 hours the Green Party had endorsed it. So we do, it's quite true, have similar goals, absolutely, on climate. Very, very committed to making sure that we don't propel the climate system into irreversible, self-accelerating and unstoppable global warming, which will make it, our climate system incompatible with human civilization. I don't want to speculate about the NDP leadership race. There's a lot. I mean, I'm friends with Avi. I'm friends with Heather. I love Laurie Idloot, and I deeply regret the decision she just made, because I think that long-term, and not speaking about the NDP in particular, but just for the health of Canadian democracy, we need more than two political parties. And the effort in the last election to see it as a two-party system is definitely to the detriment of democracy. Obviously, self-interestedly, it's to the detriment of the Greens, it's to the detriment of the NDP, but for the health of Canadian democracy, we do not want to move in the direction of the United States and a two-party system. So I'll see what the NDP members decide about who their next leader will be, but as much as I've liked and loved individual NDP members of Parliament and leaders, unfortunately, unless their back rooms clear out in a really big way and they get rid of all the people within the NDP who think the ideal position for the Green Party to be is roadkill with a big orange bus in front of it, I would really hope for change on that front, but I definitely have offered many, many olive branches to many, many NDP leaders. Let's see what happens after the leadership race is over for the NDP.
So would you ever consider Canada, the base that was struck in Kuwait, part of a military base in Kuwait that was struck that Canadians use, something disclosed by La Presse? The
Yes.
government had not proactively told Canadians or MPs about it. What do you make of that?
The evidence coming out from Trump and Netanyahu's joint assault on Iran is going to be, I'm desperately afraid, going to continue to spiral towards people being killed in places where they should have been warned ahead of time. Obviously, the now increasingly clear that the U.S. military knew it had targeted an Iranian girls' school, and as much as Trump tries to throw blame for that horrific war crime on the Iranians for bombing their own school, it doesn't look like that narrative is going to remain credible. To the base in Kuwait, yes, what's happening is war in one of the most dangerous regions of the planet. There will be more mistakes. There will be more times that we said, why didn't someone do something when they knew? Why weren't people warned? Why weren't MPs briefed? There will be more questions than answers. And as ever, the first victim of war, the first casualty is the truth.
So on the topic of both Iran and members of Parliament whom you might be friends with, your next-door neighbor MP, Will Greaves, has spoken against the position of his leader on the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Have you had a chance to talk to Mr. Greaves about this? And is there room potentially under the Green Party tent for non-interventionist, pacifistic, liberal MPs like Mr. Greaves?
I've given Will Greaves public credit, and I will again. Not only did his academic background as an associate professor includes international law, so he wasn't going to stand by silently and pretend that we could possibly side with an illegal assault on Iran that violated every single principle of the basics of the United Nations Charter. There was no grounds whatsoever for Israel or the United States to open bombardment on Iran, no matter how much I agree with everyone who says the Iranian regime of brutal and oppressive and horrific, and how much we want to help the people of Iran be rid of that regime. There's not a single word of justification in that from bombardment of Iran. So Will Greaves was absolutely right to say what he said. And it's not the first time he has distanced himself from the Prime Minister. He also pointed out that he was not happy with the Memorandum of Understanding with Alberta of November 27th, and that he was not happy with the idea that we should adjust or lift the North Coast oil tanker ban. So there will always be a place in the Green Party for any other member of Parliament who wants to be able to speak freely in defense of climate policy and in defense of peace. We're a party that doesn't believe in top-down. We don't have whipped votes. Some of you will recall when there have been more than one Green MP with me, they don't vote the way I ask them to vote. Sometimes I beg them. Doesn't matter. We believe that a member of Parliament's job fundamentally is to work for the people who elected them. So yeah, I congratulate Will Greaves for remaining a person of integrity, and I hope he'll be back here soon. Haven't seen him this week.
I wonder if you'd be able to compare and contrast Mark Carney's leadership style after having experienced him for a year as Prime Minister, and as a member of leader of a smaller party. You know, what's it kind of like dealing with him compared to past Prime Ministers?
Well, when I was first elected, May 2nd of 2011, so coming up to 15 years ago, I thought things couldn't be much worse for me as the first elected Green MP and defeating a sitting member of Stephen Harper's cabinet in the election in which the Conservatives under Stephen Harper had a majority. I thought things would be grim indeed. The fact that they're worse now, you can draw your own conclusions. I've never experienced so many omnibus bills passed so quickly. Certainly, Mark Carney is the first Prime Minister in Canadian history to invoke the Henry VIII clause, that if in passing this bill today, we are going to break other laws that have already been passed, that's all right because this is a super important goal. Whether it's Bill C-15, Build Canada Strong Act, or rather, C-5 was Build Canada Strong, C-15, the omnibus budget bill that said in the red tape reduction sections, an individual minister can decide it's in the public interest that a corporation be exempted from a Canadian law. These are new. Now, I'll back up and say, the style, and let's say give Mark Carney credit that this is probably the leadership style that Canadian voters wanted, which is the style not of a Canadian typical Prime Minister, but of a CEO, and a CEO who wants to get things done and wants to get them done fast. And the niceties of discussing it with your cabinet or your caucus before you do it, or making sure all MPs are briefed, those aren't part of his skill set. And as I hope, and as I've said, I really hope he considers that maybe he ought to change it up a bit and be more consultative and think about Parliament as democracy and not just a waste of his time, but actually a living, breathing, vital part of Canada as a nation is that we're a functional democracy, which means Parliament must be able to function and not just be constantly bulldozed.
And just on the point about the NDP, would you ever consider a merger with that party?
Listen, as an individual, as the leader of the Green Party of Canada, I would consider many things. Our Constitution is clear. The Constitution of the Green Party of Canada said if there were ever to be any such thing as a merger considered, it would require the full engagement of all our membership over a period of a couple of years. So as I said, my efforts in the direction of, for instance, not running anyone against Jagmeet Singh in his by-election when he first won his seat in Burnaby in spring of 2019. And we did a leader's courtesy agreement. I didn't ask for anything in return. And when I received smear literature lying about who I was as a person and what my positions were on issues, nonstop radio ads attacking us, I thought, gee, I might have made a mistake not asking for, at least in return, would you promise not to lie about me real soon? The problem here is not the NDP. The problem is the first-past-the-post voting system, which instills a system of punishments and rewards. Punishments are doled out for cooperation. Rewards occur for mindless partisanship and attacks without merit. I would so love to see the direction of the Canadian Greens and Canadian New Democrats change the same way they did in New Zealand between New Zealand Labour and New Zealand Greens that occurred once they got rid of first-past-the-post and adopted fair voting. That's when they could form coalitions, and the coalition, in fact, that put Jacinda Ardern in power was only possible because they got rid of first-past-the-post in New Zealand and because the Greens and Jacinda Ardern announced before the election, vote for who you want, but just so you know, if it looks like the right wing might form government, Greens and Labour in New Zealand will work together to give you the government you want. We'll never get the government we want in this country as long as we have first-past-the-post because it rewards the worst kind of behavior and it makes politics really toxic.
So on that topic, and this is my last question, kind of recognizing your point of not wanting to prejudge the NDP leadership race, Avi Lewis has said that he would entertain the notion of something along the lines of a supply and confidence agreement if that carrot were electoral reform. Mm-hmm. Is that something the Greens, whether we have Avi Lewis or Heather McPherson or Rob Ashton or anyone leading the NDP, is that something the Greens would potentially join the NDP in? Because I think if there's one thing we can agree on, the NDP leadership race has shown that there's a massive group of Canadians out there that support NDP and Green climate policies, and their voices are not getting channeled through the first-past-the-post system.
when you mention NDP candidates, and in this context, I feel like it wouldn't quite be dishonest, but let me make sure I share that the only NDP candidate for leadership who has proactively reached out and asked for a conversation about cooperation is Tenniel Johnston. She has been engaged in actually wanting to talk to me. What would that look like? So we have spoken. As I said, Avi Lewis is an old friend. Heather McPherson and I have worked together in this Parliament so often on so many issues. Obviously, with any one of the NDP candidates, we would have a lot in common around issues. Again, I think we'd have to get rid of first past the post to see real cooperation happen. Maybe there are other ways it could happen. But at this point, I will await, like most people who watch politics, very interested to see who wins the NDP leadership race. And again, the NDP members of Parliament here are all friends of mine. I care deeply for them, and what Don Davies has been going through just kind of breaks my heart because he's such a good guy, and we need their voices in this place. I'm lucky that I was the opposition party leader of the Progressive Left who held on to my seat, because it's meant that I've been here and able to track and monitor and bear witness to the things that are happening here that otherwise don't get coverage. And I look forward to the NDP being stronger so it can be part of that movement for democracy in Parliament, which right now, when you have the three recognized parties continually working together, Canadians don't see this. The Conservatives and the Liberals and the Bloc are pushing everything through almost unanimously every time. So why Carney would need a majority government, I can't imagine. He's got all the votes he wants anytime he wants them, and things are being pushed through that I think would scandalize most Canadians if they got to read the fine print, which I do, because I may be the only member of Parliament who reads all the laws that come before us, but I promise you I'm one of the few, if not the only one, who reads everything. And I think, Canadians, they can't know that this law is taking effect 26 years ago. That's one of those things that I find when in a community meeting in my own riding tends to stop people short. They say, what? What? It's a lot is happening that I think would make heads spin if people had time to look at it. But our heads are spinning from Trump. Our heads are spinning. And my God, the world feels like it's coming unglued and spinning out of control. And what I really want more than anything, regardless of what party we're all in, is that as all of us as members of Parliament, remember first and foremost, we are Canadians. And if we can hold on collectively to our own love of this country and to being a pillar of sanity in a world that seems to be spinning out of control, we will be doing the whole world a favor if we emphasize more what we have in common than what we're angry about. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. Merci. Bonne journée.